Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another session at the AKLF Festival 2024. Thank you all for coming here today. I'm honored to be with Dr. Alka Pande and Swapna Liddle to talk about the Mughals and us. And of course, we will bring in the parallels with our wonderful city of Kolkata and the wider region of Bengal. I won't call it a state because it's very much a multicultural region that Bengal should be celebrated as. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes that always surprises people from a book called Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelman. In the beginning, there were two nations. One was a vast, mighty, magnificent empire, brilliantly organized and culturally unified, which dominated a massive swath of the earth. The other was an undeveloped, semi-feudal realm riven by religious factionalism and barely able to feed its illiterate, diseased and stinking masses. The first nation was India, the second was England. The year was 1577 when the Mughal Empire was in the process of uniting India. Their domain spread 1,200 miles along the Tropic of Cancer from the white salt flats of the Rann of Kutch on the Arabian Sea to the verdant delta of the holy river Ganges in Bengal, and from the snowy crags of Kabul to the lush teak forests of the Vindhyan foothills. The 100 million people who lived under them were cosmopolitan and affluent. In 1577, the average Indian peasant enjoyed a relatively higher income and lower taxation than his descendants would ever again. In the bazaars were sold gold from Jaipur, rubies from Burma, fine shawls from Kashmir, spices from the islands, opium from Bengal, and dancing girls from Africa. Though governed by Muslims under a legal system based loosely on Sharia law, its millions of non-Muslim subjects, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, were allowed freedom of conscience and custom. So the focus of our discussion today is how the Mughal aesthetics and practice actually impacted art and architecture in today's India. What persists? What have we lost? And what is their living legacy? And how have we as a country benefited from it, and is any of it relevant today? So the Islamic sultanates that came to India mainly comprised invaders from Turkey, Arabia, Persia, but also soldiers, intelligentsia, artisans, artists, mystics, who were fleeing persecution from the Mongolian raids of Western and Southern Asia. And they found refuge in the prosperous Mughal court. And it was especially these artists and artisans that found a safe home. And they truly flourished under the patronage of the Mughal rulers. So we have today two experts in this sort of era of art and architecture. And the Mughal Empire stretched from 1526 all the way up to 1858. From Babur, who was only around for 4 years, but he very importantly convinced his followers to actually stay in India. And then all the way up to Akbar, where my quote came from. His son Jahangir, who were, both of them were patrons of art and architecture. And Shah Jahan ended up inheriting the richest kingdom in the world. And although his focus was the Taj Mahal and the zenith of art and architecture when he built the Red Fort and Shalimar Gardens, today I would like to focus on the almost eternal city of Shah Jahanabad, lovingly known today as Purani Delhi, where Swapna, in her most recent book, this beautiful, beautiful illustrated book, she's mapped out in detail the neighborhoods and the diverse communities of the Mughals that lived in this part of city, depicting how it looked and worked as a multicultural community and city, which was a microcosm of a much larger multicultural empire. So this was a feature of Delhi right from the founding of it, right up to its demise in 1857. So Swapna, could I start by asking you to talk a little bit about this, give us some examples, and then Alka, maybe you can take this forward in the artist's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Husna-Tara, for that. And before I start, a huge thank you to the Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival, its organizers, and this lovely city of Kolkata for having me here. It's always such a pleasure to come here it's of course, the literary milieu here is something that is quite special. So I'm really extremely happy to be here. Thank you so much. The Mughals, actually, they are kind of interesting from the point of view of the multiculturalism that you're talking about. But I think I'd like to just go reference the period a little bit before this also, the so-called Delhi Sultanate, which really is a period of several different dynasties who rule in large parts of India from their capital, most of the time in Delhi, though they do shift from time to time as well, notably to Agra. But I think what has happened is that we tend to characterize these dynasties, these empires as essentially in some way Muslim or Islamic empires. And in that we are taking a kind of analysis that developed during our colonial period. And if you look at the kind of way in which these actually worked or actually identified themselves, and I'll come to that in a minute, they worked not as Muslim empires, and Delhi was not really an Islamic city under them, because what you see is, in fact, yes, some of these rulers were Muslim in their personal faith, but essentially the people who, in their bureaucracy, in the patronage of the arts, in the patronage of architecture, in many, many different fields of knowledge, what you actually find is a confluence of cultures in all these fields. And this you can see in very, very early parts of, say, the architecture of Delhi. And the architecture of Delhi is something that I am really particularly interested in because I lead walks there, etc. I've studied them studied these places quite a lot. And I find that you have, say, Indian stonemasons sitting and carving structures in these so-called Islamic buildings. And what you see when you look at those sculptures, or if you look at that ornamentation, or you look at the architectural forms, you will see the influence of a very strong, you will realize that it is not suddenly Islamic architecture coming into the scene, but what you find is the influence of new forms that are coming in, but it's very much an evolution of an established tradition. So it's not as if it's an imported tradition that comes in. Yes, there are influences, there are new techniques that come in. For instance, the use of domes and arches in architecture. But at the same time, what you see is they get adapted into a pre-existing style rather than a sharp break. So that is very much a part of the picture that we are trying to paint of the Mughals as well. And of course, by the time you come to the Mughals, you must realize, one is that we are actually better informed about the Mughals because they're closer in time to us. So we have texts, we have a lot of the art that they produce, which of course Alka is going to talk about. But I think one thing we must realize is the Mughals themselves, not only did they live, any empire that is so big, a city that is so cosmopolitan, and necessarily has people from very many different backgrounds living. It's not as if, it's not only that they had people from all over what we today see as India, different regions living in Delhi. There were Portuguese living in Delhi, there were Armenians living in Delhi, there were Frenchmen living in Delhi, notably some of them Italians. Many of them lived in Delhi for several years and left behind their mark in the form of memoirs. In the book Shahjahanabad, where I map out the city, I talk about how a very prominent Portuguese family, for instance, the Deremaus, how they lived in one quarter. So it is this very, very multicultural empire. And the Mughals themselves, please remember, they were also, we tend to forget, and this is a marginalization of women, because we forget how many of the Mughal emperors' mothers were actually Rajput. And therefore, and that is a part of their identity which they acknowledge. So, when we talk about them as Islamic, as Muslim, as somehow foreigners, we must remember that.
Yes. I love to use the word conscious intermingling of, architecture, of communities, sort of themes and values when, even as Bengal as a region has adopted that. So Alka, would love to hear about your thoughts about this multiculturalism through the world of art.
So first, I'm really delighted to be here in the city of my birth, Kolkata, which is also very much the hub of the Mughal Suba. And the time it was the hub of the Mughal Suba in the 17th and 18th centuries, it was one of the largest kind of divisions. It went on to Bangladesh, to to Jharkhand, Bihar, and the West Bengal. So it was a very, very important area. And I'm really delighted to be here with Husna-Tara and Swapna, two people talking, rivers flowing side by side. And Swapna has beautifully mapped and is really contouring and geographically talking about the Mughal presence. And I love the Indian summer quote, because for me, that is also very important, because when I look at art, particularly, art is very much linked also to the prosperity of the period in which it is produced, whether it was the Belle Epoque in Paris or it was the golden period, what we call amongst the Guptas in India, which really saw a lot of flowering of ideas, whether it was science, whether it was the writing of great texts like the Kama Sutra or the Navaratans in the court of Chandragupta. What we see in the time of the Mughals, and when Husna says that Shah Jahan inherits one of the richest empires of the world, what we really see, and what I think, I don't even want to just call it the Mughals, it was really a kind of a consciousness of the period to which we take the word Mughal, because that was the dynasty which was ruling. And as Swapna said, there was really a hybridity which was so important at this time, because many, as Swapna has pointed out, many of the mothers of the Mughal rulers were Rajput women, particularly that of Akbar, who set up the Deen-e-Ilahi, who brought in this whole thing of the Sufis, the whole culture of the world faith. And Fatehpur Sikri, which is one of my favorite architectural splendors of India, even though it was a failed city by way of its water supplies, I'm not going to go into that trajectory because that is a whole new thing. But Fatehpur itself is symbolic of the plural culture which was brought in by the Mughals, whether it was one of the palaces dedicated to the Turkish princess, whether it was dedicated to his own mother, whether it was the Buland Darwaza, which was the victory of Gujarat. And you see the coming of the great Central Asian influence when Humayun went into the court of Shah Hamza and brought in the Hamza brothers and brought in a completely new way of looking at the painted surface, at the handheld drawings. And he brought in the lavish use of lapis lazuli, whereas Indians, if you see our earlier, you have art is never produced in a vacuum. There's always a continuity. And if you look at the Chora Panchisika, if you look at the palm leaf manuscripts, you look at Ajanta murals, you see the scale changing and coming into what you are known as miniature paintings or handheld paintings, which are very, very intimate. You see a great influence which comes in from Central Asia and from Iran, which was in many ways the center of the world. And you see iconography which goes into textiles, and that itself is seen in West Bengal, because West Bengal becomes a great space for the textiles, for steel, for a lot of manufacturing in the time of the Mughals, which is really harnessed by our colonial rulers, I think after the Battle of Buxar, which becomes more and more a colonial citadel, a colonial fortress. But by which time the Mughal aesthetics has permeated everywhere, and not to mention the ruler of Awadh, Wajid Ali Shah, who came here with 500 people and settled in Matia Burj and brought in the refined aesthetics of Awadh. Awadh at that point was the center of the very essence of what it was to be a great cosmopolitan, hybrid, plural empire, whether it was games, whether it was the 250 pulaus which were created, whether it was the biryani which started with the, you know, the lovely story of the biryani which started in Lucknow, where the workers were working in the construction of the tomb of the Bada Imam Bada, and they just put the rice and meat under the earth with some condiments thrown in, which was their food, and that was the beginning of the biryani. So you see, the Mughals kind of permeated in every aspect of our lives, whether it was food, whether it is the clothing. I mean, today the shalwar, the kurta and the dupatta, it was actually brought in the way back in the 7th century of the Christian era, when the first Arab invasion happened, and when people came riding horses and wearing what you call the suttan. It all began with the Islamic influence into India, whether it was the Adhai Din Ka Jhopda, which was constructed near Ajmer. You have the Mughal influence in building, in food, in clothing, and in the beautiful objects which were created, whether it was the pandan, whether it was the surahi, whether it was the rose essence which was created by Mumtaz Mahal. So you have, in every aspect of our lives, we have the great contribution of the Mughals. And the beauty of India has always been that we assimilate, we absorb, and yet we retain our own identity. And that is why you see how the Islamic architecture, whether you look at it in West Bengal or you look at it in Alhambra in Spain, where the Moors were, it comes from the same root. The arches, the domes, which come from Turkey, which come from, you see them everywhere. You see them in Russia. Why are our domes different? Why is our Pietra Dura different? Why are the beautiful calligraphy that we have and the way it is embellished is different? Because India too has contributed, and there is this fabulous assimilation of both Islamic and Hindu traditions. And when you look at the Alai Darwaza, the Qutub Minar, you know that the sensibility, many of the ideas may be Islamic, but the hands that created were very Indian. So you have this most beautiful marriage between the two aesthetics, the Hindu aesthetics and the Islamic aesthetics, which creates the beautiful medieval aesthetics, which is rich everywhere. And you see how rich the poetry is in the Mughal courts. You look at this great poet, Keshavadas from Orcha, and how he's celebrated, and how he talks of the Nayak Naikas, how he talks of the kinds of women which are present as heroines in the court poetry, which was very much celebrated by the Mughals. And the Karkhanas of Akbar, where the most beautiful Ramayana and the Mahabharata have been illustrated.
Absolutely, and translated as well. The Ramayana was translated by the Mughals. And you're absolutely right, the similarities with the cities of the Great Silk Route, stretching all the way from, Samarkand, Bukhara, you can see the synergy that has crept in with the Persian refinement and the rooted history of the Timurid dynasty that has crept in with the extra Indian influences. But what's really interesting is that even though after Aurangzeb, in sort of the early 1700s, how the Nawab of Bengal, Tipu Sultan, the Nawab of Awadh, the Nizam of Hyderabad, even though they became much stronger political regions of India, the association with the power and sovereignty of the Mughals always remained. So for almost 150 years, Delhi was still sort of considered the capital and the center of power. And I'll just go to Swapna's new book, The Broken Script, which actually talks about how during the really sort of tumultuous period from 1803 to 1857, when the Mughal emperor fell, politically, the Mughal emperor had no control. Administratively, he had no control. But the culture continued to grow, the refinement, the poetry continued to grow in this sort of broken script period that she talks about so beautifully. So I would love for you to talk a little bit, Swapna, about how during turbulent times, and today the times are very similar, where, you know, a lot of us are being affected by politics on a global scale. But how were the Mughals able to keep their culture developing and growing despite not having political control?
Before I go to your question, let me just add a little bit to what you said. It made me think, because I can never, sort of, particularly sitting here, it made me remember that when you talked about the importance of the Suba of Bengal, when Akbar came to Bengal, he was also very taken, as everybody is taken by the food, everybody is taken by, he was very taken by the architecture as well. And particularly the vaulted roof of Bengal. And he goes back and he goes to Fatehpur Sikri and he tells his architects, please make me this kind of vaulted
For the
roof.
Turkish princess.
Make me this kind of vaulted roof. And that particular kind of vaulted roof becomes a very important part of Mughal architecture, and it is called the Bangala. It's called Bangala because of Bengal. So it's called the Bangala roof. In fact, that's the root for your it's called Bangladar, but or Bangala, but it also is the root of our modern word bungalow, the English word. That's where it's come from. Anyhow, but what you were kind of talking about, yes, of course, the Mughals not only partly it was also political power, because even though the Mughals had ruled over a large part of what we today see as the subcontinent, and because of that lasting impression of sovereignty, even when the actual Mughal empire started to decline, to break up into different parts, many of these later successor states, as we call them, continued to acknowledge Mughal sovereignty. In fact, the East India Company, when its Bengal presidency, and later the Governor General, who also is based in Bengal, used to use mint coins in the name of the Mughal emperor. And they're doing this just because they want to establish their legitimacy to rule over Bengal, so they have to acknowledge the Mughal emperor's name as well. So that is, of course, a very that political importance continues, at least the symbolic value continues for a long time, because it is felt that the people of India still think of Mughals as the actual rulers. So that is there, but of course the cultural impact is very much there. And as I said, and I always reinforce this, it's a two-way thing. And the Mughal culture, prosperity is very important to that, because of course the fact that the Mughal empire had all sorts of resources at its command enabled it to commission these big projects, big architectural projects, for instance, like the Taj Mahal. But also that they were willing to take the best from different parts, not only of their own empire, but different parts of the world. So a technique which was at its height in Florence in Akbar's period, or after that Jahangir. In Jahangir's period, this pietra dura comes to India and begins to be, and is very soon mastered by the Indian stone carvers. So that is, of course, the beauty of the Indian artisan, who quickly assimilates these things. And pietra dura becomes something, it's called parchin gari in Farsi. And that's how it's referred to in the Mughal records. So it begins to be used. But there are other things of other parts of Mughal culture, and of course techniques in stone carving, many of our craft techniques are all those which have come from that period, which chikankari. I'm wearing a chikankari garment at the moment, but chikankari, all of these develop at the same time. And I'm not saying that they develop by the Mughals necessarily, even under direct patronage, but many of them come up at the time where the peace and prosperity generally fosters the development of culture. One of the things that develops and is a lasting legacy for us today is the Urdu language. That Urdu language which develops out of the spoken language of the Delhi region, but with a lot of inputs from different sources, then becomes a major literary language of India. And that is a legacy that we still have. And it is apart from all the death knells that are bemoaned from time to time, it is still a living thing.
That's wonderful. Alka, would you like to talk about the challenge of maintaining culture during politically turbulent times, which is such a relevant topic today, I think?
No, I was just going to come to the question that you had asked, and you talked of political power languishing and how Mughal aesthetics continues. So I actually believe that culture unites all. Political powers, they have their own kind of agendas, and what you are seeing, and you are talking of challenging times today, you see that happening all across the world. It's just not in India, it's in Turkey, it's in Italy, it's in Brazil, you see that happening all over. What is very, very, for me, I mean, and I'm, some people also get very cross with me. In fact, there was a very important historian who got very cross with me when I said that art is the soul of society, to which he said, what do you mean? And became quite apoplectic over that. But the point when I talk of art, I talk of the very essence of nature of emotions. So here I'm talking of emotions. And politics and emotions, though they are quite interconnected, and you see a lot of that happening today because religion is being connected to politics, and that becomes very emotional. But on the other hand, emotions are deeply connected with culture. It doesn't matter who the political powers can be. Can anyone deny the beauty of Ghalib of Delhi? Can anybody deny the beauty of Mir of Delhi? Nobody will say that he is just an Islamic poet. They're poets of Delhi. Their sensibility is about Delhi. They love Delhi as much as any Hindu loves Delhi or an Islamic person loves Delhi. And when you look at politics, sure, politics has its own role, but do you think in present times there's not an interconnectedness between the poets of the world? Or why do we have world music? Why are we having jugalbandis with a musician, say, from the south of France and south of India? So there is a connection, and the connection is about human emotions. And when we look at human emotions, I'd like to go back to the theory of rasa, which is there in our Natya Shastra, which is being taught at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, where they call it the theory of emotions. So the emotive quality, whether it is Mughal, whether it is Islam, whether it is Hindu, but when we look at the politics of nations, it transcends that. It goes beyond that. Because what are we looking at? We are looking at the beauty and aesthetics of art and culture. And what is the meaning of art? Here I'm going to talk about the meaning of art. I like to quote one of my favorite authors, the French author called Michel Proust, who says that you don't need to look at art through new landscapes, but through new eyes. And Pico Iyer says the same. And what are those new eyes? It can be new eyes of anybody who's living within that political geography of the nation. And even today, can one take away the pan, which is brought in from Central Asia, which was also, betel leaf was also seen in the Kama Sutra, but it is a very different pan which came in as a result of eating rich food created whether it was in Awadh or in Hyderabad, but the food was different. Like you will see, the Hyderabadi food is very different to the very highly nuanced tastes of Awadh. So when you are talking of how culture rules or how does it stay, culture is at a different level. It is there at a very social level. It is there at a level which goes beyond. A pirni is eaten by everybody today. A pirni is very, very much a part of the Islamic inroads, Central Asian food being served in a clay pot. It is eaten and savored by the same people who eat the Indian kheer. So therefore, what you see, the plurality which goes beyond the politics of any power that is present at that moment. So I also believe that we believe in a circular concept of time. The Indian concept of time is circular. So things keep changing. So when this politics goes and it comes down and another politics is coming up, culture is never stagnant. It is always very dynamic. It is always playing out. But there are certain things which are constant. So the constancy is the beauty of the arts. And that for me is very important.
Absolutely. And it can be such an emotion. And I hope the new generation will continue this beautiful empathy and aesthetics with art. All I can say is that my 19-year-old daughter went to college last semester to study cognitive sciences and molecular biology. After 8 months, she's planning to do a double major in the history of art. So there you go. You can combine everything today, and I hope future children and generations will continue to do that.
So I'll just take 1 minute. So since actually I am in the realm of arts and you can't show anything without an image, I'm just taking an image of Akbar II from Swapna's book just to show you that in this image, it is such an image which talks of the wealth, of the wonder that was, as A.L. Basham says, the wonder that was India, but I talk of the wonder that is India. You see the beautiful jewels which are worn by Akbar II. You see the mirror, and the mirror which is very beautifully ornamental, but this was very much part of the Udaipur culture too. So if you look at the handheld paintings which were done in the local courts, whether it's Udaipur in particular, where they were beautifully hand painted, you see the same kind of thing which was in the Mughals. You see the same kind of thing which was done by the later colonial aesthetics. You see the same kind of jewels which were worn but in different ways. When I saw this absolutely stunning exhibition at Buckingham Palace, which was the gifts given to the Prince Consort when he came to India at the turn of the 19th century, and the local rulers came and gave him gifts. You see the pandan, you see the khushbudan given by the ruler of Jaipur, and you see a host of appearances. You see this metal armor which is given by a small ruler from Orcha with gleaming emeralds on it. So you see a whole kind of different influences which amalgamate into this wonderful exhibition, and you see the kind of transformations in art, and you see the beauty which makes up the many, many influences, because I believe India is not a country, it's a continent. And in this continent, from the various states, the kind of differences that you see, and it is actually only in India that you really celebrate the Derridian différence. We, in every state, have so many crafts and arts that as an Indian, I'm sure I don't know enough of them. Thank you.
And your new book, 108 Objects, is something that you should all definitely refer to, because it has so much of this transient nature of objects sort of pervading history. So we're heading towards the end of the session, and we're going to take some questions soon, but I'm going to just end with my final thought on the Victoria Memorial versus the Taj Mahal. Both were made out of the same material, both were dedicated to the memory of a woman, and we are sitting in this great city that built Victoria Memorial probably confirming the fact that the shift of the capital was an afterthought. Why would you build the high courts that we have in the Victoria Memorial if you were going to shift the capital a few years later? So any thoughts on that? I mean, the Mughal architecture is described as, the Victoria Memorial architecture is described as Indo-Saracenic, Indo-Gothic, Indo-Mughal, Neo-Mughal. So, and also Lord Curzon said that the central chamber had to be an inch larger than the central chamber of the Taj to rival it. So any final thoughts?
I'm not an historian of architecture, so I cannot talk about the merits of architecture. But yes, the Victoria Memorial in many ways emphasizes Curzon's view of Calcutta as the preeminent British city in India. And it's interesting that even the Mughals, Alka was talking about Akbar II. Akbar II acknowledged Calcutta's importance in his time because he realized that a lot of the political power rested in Calcutta. And that is why, in fact, he picked Ram Mohan Roy. By the way, the title that Ram Mohan Roy used, Raja was the title given by the Mughal Emperor Akbar II. So he picked Raja Ram Mohan Roy to represent him in Britain. The very fact acknowledging that this
crossed the Kala Pani and traveled across to the court.
So therefore that is very much a part of Curzon's way of reinforcing Calcutta's importance. And what of course happens is that very soon afterwards there is the transfer of capital from Calcutta to Delhi, and that is a part of another story, but it is again a reassertion of the importance of, and in some ways the legacy of an older empire or older empires which had their capital in Delhi.
And the symbolism. And the symbolism of Delhi and the Mughal
Delhi
power.
Yes, and the idea that the British, who were now facing a lot of problems with the rising national movement, could try and get back, do a kind of image makeover of the Raj to make it more acceptable to an Indian population by saying, we are going to move it back to the old capital. So therefore Delhi happens.
I would just say one thing, while I understand your question, I think it's a very, very smart question. But for Victoria Memorial and the Taj, I would say comparisons are odious. And for me, the Taj has a completely different sensibility. I'm talking of the aesthetics. It was a monument of love. And Victoria Memorial is a monument of power. So these are two very different ideas which are driving both the buildings. And Lord Curzon, I think particularly, though he was fabulous for archaeology and saving the heritage of India, he probably lacked the emotion which Shah Jahan had. But when you look at the beauty and the fineness of the jalis, the pietra dura, the calligraphy, all that is missing. It becomes a grand monument of colonial power. But for me, the Taj remains as a monument of emotion. Now, there are a lot of stories today saying, was it a monument of love? There are many stories because history is being reinterpreted. We are no longer looking only at our colonial historians. A lot of Indian historians who understand the sensibility and are writing from their heart are reinterpreting the reasons also for the Taj. But for me, I still like to believe in the romantic idea that it was a monument of love. And what you see is the absolute beauty and the delicacy which is missing in the Victoria Memorial. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And there are so many beautiful monuments. There's even, I just found out about the baby Taj in Aurangabad, that was the Bibi Kamakra, which was almost as beautiful as the Taj with different proportions. But the legacy really is quite amazing. So we have time for a couple of questions. So is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask Dr. Pande or Swapna about anything? There's a mic.
Yeah. Ma'am, I would like to ask Swapna ma'am. Actually, about almost a decade ago, I came across your book, 14 Historical Walks in Delhi. which was when I was in Delhi, and it gave me a great opportunity to know Delhi. And it took me almost a year to take out time and do those walks. They were so beautifully, and the maps and everything was so nicely done. So and I also came to know that Delhi was like created and broken down 7 times and what. So do you have anything in store for this part of the country as well?
I'm sorry, I don't have the ability, I don't have the expertise. So therefore, I'm a tourist. I'm somebody who's going to discover. So I look to Husna-Tara and other people to
It's an easy city to
me.
discover and fall in love with. I'm testament to that. After 26 years of discovering Calcutta, it's truly incredible. There are incredible walks, and they are being documented slowly by passionate people. There are many in the audience, and there's a whole heritage group over here that are working towards it. But Swapna is definitely an example for us all, and we hope that we will be able to sort of document it like you do. We're struggling to find maps these days because everybody refers to Google now. So, we were looking for a map of Bengal yesterday. I don't know, Chris, have you found one in Calcutta? He has. He had to go all the way to College Street because there are no maps in any of the bookshops because all the booksellers were saying we've stopped printing them because people just refer to their phones and to Google. So I think your book, Shah Jahanabad, is a great preservation of a legacy of cartography and mapping things that, are closer to us in terms of reachability. So thank you for that question, and I hope...
It should be a benchmark for the...
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are very inspired. Okay, time's up. So thank you very much, Swapna and Alka. That was an engaging discussion. And thank you to the audience for joining us, for celebrating the Mughals and us. And I think they very much do still exist and pervade. And I hope we can continue to celebrate what they gave us. Thank you.